right. Ron, I'll get together.
Well, good morning.
Good morning.
I want to welcome you to this event this morning, to our event, Healthcare in Crisis and What You Need to Know. And we're very blessed to have you here. This morning and this afternoon, we'll be giving you a lot of information. And there's more information available if you want to contact one of our staff here, Texas Right to Life as well. And please feel free to call on us for help. That's what we're here for. This morning, we're going to start off with our first speaker, Julie Grimstad. I'm going to read this because I know Julie so well that if I don't stick to what I have here, I'll be here for half an hour talking about my friend. Julie Grimstad is Executive Director of Life is Worth Living, and she's a past chair of the Pro-Life Healthcare Alliance and an advisor to Human Life Alliance. She's the founder and coordinator of St. John's Befrienders, a ministry to nursing home residents and homebound elderly. And please take time to ask her about that. It's a wonderful, wonderful outreach. She's a nationally known speaker and writer, and she addresses all aspects of medical decision-making and patient advocacy. She has served as a volunteer patient for 30 years and was director of the Center for the Rights of the Terminally Ill. And I'm sorry, I don't know if I said who I am. I'm Jo Chope with Human Life Alliance, and I can tell you that Julie is one of the people I call on regularly for assistance if I have questions. So please welcome Julie Grimstad.
Oh, do I need a mic? Microphones and I don't get along, so if you, can I move this? Can you still hear me? No? Then I have to keep this here. Whoop. Hi. Now you can hear me. Okay. You know, as human beings, we're all vulnerable. And in a civilized society, we have a moral duty to take care of each other. But healthcare professionals in particular have taken oaths to protect and preserve human life, to heal, to cure. And when you cannot heal or cure, you can still care for people. You don't have to say there's nothing more that I can do. There's always something that can be done. Doctors and nurses who care for the sick and infirm are highly respected, or they have been in the past. Not so much anymore. Now we look at them more as providers instead of our protectors. And so we have to look at the changes that have taken place in healthcare over the last, say, I want to say probably 70 or so years, healthcare has been changing. But in the last, I'd say since the 80s, maybe the early 90s, we have seen some drastic changes in healthcare. No longer is it the patient's best interests or even their life that doctors are committed to preserving. It is dependent upon whether or not somebody thinks your life is worth living. So we're going to take a look today at what has happened in healthcare and what we can do to at least witness to the fact that human life is sacred. We're grateful, of course, to the healthcare professionals who have healed us, who've taken care of us over the years. We're very grateful to modern medicine. But things have changed very much in healthcare. It simply isn't what it used to be. Historic medical ethics, traditional medical ethics was always based on Judeo-Christian principles and the Hippocratic Oath. The core principle was always the sanctity of life. Everybody's life was sacred. it was a privilege to take care of the sick and the suffering. The aim was to protect and preserve life. Okay, no matter what, until natural death, no matter what the person's condition was, we still took care of them until they died naturally. Modern bioethics has a whole different mindset. It's utilitarian, which means if you're not useful, then your life isn't worth living. It's secular, which means they've forsaken the Judeo-Christian principles. The core principle of the modern bioethics, as it's called, which really started in the 1960s to become popular in the medical field, the core principle is the quality of life. Of particular concern is a cost-benefit analysis. Are you worth taking care of? I would sum it up as, we will save your life if we think it's worth living. So, in 1993, Dr. Ezekiel Emanuel, who would later become one of the architects of Obamacare, wrote this in the American Journal of Medicine. Increasingly, it will be our collective determination as to what lives are worth living that will decide how incompetent patients are treated. This gives us a stark look at what modern bioethics are all about. And modern bioethics are in the mainstream of medicine now. The traditional medical ethics are no longer in the mainstream. So we're looking at doctors who want to follow their consciences. We're saying to them, we want to help you. That's what the Pro-Life Healthcare Alliance says. We want to help you. We want to protect your conscience rights. We want to help you find patients who want a doctor with that kind of a mentality, the sanctity of life mentality. That's one of our missions, is to not just help patients, but to help conscientious physicians and nurses so that they can practice medicine the way that they want to. Secular bioethicists have such a different mindset than we do. And I think I'm speaking to everybody here when I say that they don't look at God as the creator of life. They think that life is in man's hands and we can do whatever we want to do. Anybody here familiar with the gun culture? If you live in Texas, you probably are. There's a color code that is used in the gun culture. And there's condition white, where you're unaware and unprepared. You can be walking down the street with your earbuds in and you don't know anything that's going on around you. If somebody attacked you, you would be totally off guard. Okay? Then there's condition yellow, where you're relaxed but you're alert. And there's condition orange, where you are alert and you perceive that there might be something dangerous that threatens you. And then there's condition red. Condition red is where the threat is imminent. Your life is in danger. But you're alert and aware. You're not caught off guard. And so you can protect yourself. What we're doing today is we are going to teach you how to be aware. Don't go around with your earbuds in. Pay attention to what's going on around you. Recognize, if you have a loved one in the hospital, recognize what's going on. Don't just take the word of the healthcare providers of what they're doing for your mother or your father. Ron's going to talk later about the things that they can do secretly or stealthily that you will not even know until your loved one has died, and then you'll start thinking, well, that wasn't right and that wasn't right. So be aware of what's going on around you. I first became aware of what was going on around me about 31 years ago, as far as euthanasia and assisted suicide are concerned. I graduated from nursing school in 1969, and at our capping ceremony, we took the Nightingale Pledge. The Nightingale Pledge is where you promise, you take a promise, a solemn promise, that you will be committed to protecting those in your care from harm and injustice. And so when I took that pledge, it was a lifelong commitment. It wasn't just, okay, when I quit being a nurse, I didn't take that pledge seriously anymore. So it was 31 years ago that a friend called me, and she alerted me to the Right to Die movement. Now, I kind of had it on my radar, but I didn't realize what was going on. And she told me about these groups that planned to gain legal and social acceptance for euthanasia, both voluntary and involuntary, and that they wanted to end the lives. Their goal was to end the lives of those who were unfit to live. So 2 cases happened right after that that really brought it to mind. My friend Mary Sinander, who was very active even at that time in the anti-euthanasia movement, called me up one day and she said, "Julie, I have a case. I was on a television show, and a lady called in and said that when her mother was in the hospital, her mother's roommate was starved and dehydrated to death." And remember, this was back in like 1985. So the lady's name was, the lady who was starved and dehydrated to death, her name was Ella Bathurst. She was in Abbott Northwestern Hospital in Minneapolis. The roommate's story goes like this, and the daughter was there also. For 6 days, Ella cried for water, and nobody gave her any, and finally Ella died. What had happened when the case was investigated by the Hennepin County Attorney's Office was that the daughter had come in from the East Coast, from her job on the East Coast, and had told some nurses at the hospital that her mother, who had a broken hip and was there to have her broken hip repaired, that her mother would not want to go to a nursing home. And so could they please do something to make sure that she didn't have to go to a nursing home, take away her food and water. And the nurses put a nothing by mouth order on the end of her bed. And so for 6 days, nobody gave her any food and water. This is how simple it is to kill somebody. You put an NPO order on the end of their bed and everybody thinks she's going in for surgery. Nobody investigated. There was no doctor's order for that. It was just some nurses who decided that's what they were going to do to accommodate the daughter's wishes. While the mother was in the hospital being dehydrated and starved to death, her daughter went out and held an estate sale, sold all of her mother's worldly possessions, and planned her mother's funeral so that as soon as her mother died, she could go back east, back to her job, and resume her life. That case shocked me because that was the Hennepin County Attorney Office's report. You know what happened to that hospital? Nothing. Not a thing. All they were told was to review their supportive care only policy. Nothing happened to the daughter. Those kinds of things happen over and over. And then it hit closer to home. My next door neighbor, the lady across the street, Jane Dealing, who was the first person to greet us when we moved into our house in Billings, Montana. A 90-some-year-old lady who walked in the hills of Montana every day for a couple of miles. She brought chocolate chip cookies over to me and my kids when we first moved into the house. She got sick. She got a kidney infection. And we tried to convince her to go to the hospital, and she was resistant. But we got her there. The first night she was there, she was agitated. And so they put her on a drug called Haldol to calm her down. In a couple of days, Jane could not swallow. They had taken out her IV. They had her on antibiotics, but they had taken out her IV, and she was no longer able to swallow. I went and tried to feed her lunch. She couldn't even swallow ice cream. So I went to the doctor, and I said, something's wrong here. Your mom could swallow 2 days ago. This isn't right. So I went to the pharmacist. The daughter got the list of medications that the mother was on, took them to the pharmacist. The pharmacist says it's the Haldol. Get her off the Haldol, and she'll be fine in a little while. So the daughter and I went to the doctor. We said, take her off the Haldol, please. The pharmacist says this is what is causing her not to be able to swallow. They wouldn't take her off the Haldol. He said, if you don't trust me to be her doctor and do what's right for her, then find a new doctor. And the daughter, who was like 72 years old, didn't know what to do. I said, find a new doctor. So we did. The damage was done, though. Jane was never the same person after that. She didn't trust us because we were the ones who put her in the hospital. She ended up in a nursing home a little while after that. She lived in her own home with somebody to help take care of her for a while, but she never regained her spunk. She never walked anymore. It was very, very sad, and all because some doctor decided that she needed Haldol because she was agitated and wouldn't take her off of it when we wanted her to, and it took us a couple of days to find another doctor. Those things happen. You need to be on top of what's happening. In fact, if somebody says they don't want to go to a hospital, maybe you shouldn't take them there. Maybe you should just take them to the doctor's office and get what they need and take care of them at home. The facts are, even though people don't like to talk about it, I thought about calling my talk this time, "Can't we talk about something more pleasant?" Because this is not a pleasant topic. And I think we have so few people here because of the fact that people are uncomfortable discussing demise, your own frailty, your own vulnerability, your own mortality, and they may be in denial that what's happening in the healthcare system is really happening. Even though we see it all around us, we see the signs, we're uncomfortable. I read a poem the other day, and it was something like this. Yesterday I met a man upon the stair, a man who wasn't there. I met him there again today. I wish he'd go away. Don't you think we have those ghosts in our lives that just niggle at us and bother us, and we wish they would go away and we wouldn't have to think about them anymore, and we keep shoving them to the back of our head? I'll think about that tomorrow. I'll fill out my durable power of attorney for healthcare and name a healthcare agent tomorrow. Tomorrow you might be in a car accident. You need to think about this today. 80% of us at some point are going to have a lingering or terminal illness. And most of us are going to experience some kind of injury or illness like Ella or Jane. Who's going to be there to protect us? Roughly 65 million Americans provide care for someone, usually a family member, with a disability or a chronic illness. And we all are going to face challenging medical decisions, whether for ourselves or for somebody else that we love. Sometimes patients and their families just don't know when it's morally legitimate or medically appropriate to stop treatment or to continue treatment. So we're going to give you some principles to follow today, but first I want to give you a few definitions. Euthanasia. Euthanasia is an act or an omission which causes death in order to eliminate suffering or some other problem. And oftentimes the problem is the person. It's not the person's problem that we're solving, it's getting rid of the person who's the problem. But we forget that disabled, the elderly, the seriously ill, they're not disposable. They're our parents. They're our sisters and brothers. They're our neighbors. We need to take care of these people. Euthanasia is something that can be done by omission. That means you take away food and water or some other life-sustaining treatment that the patient needs to live in order to intentionally cause that person's death. Or an action such as a lethal injection, smothering with a pillow, those sorts of things. Euthanasia can be disguised, as I said, as either end-of-life care or pain control. Some people are dehydrated and starved to death while they're sedated or given an overdose of morphine. You don't know that because they hide it. Then there's assisted suicide. Assisted suicide is where a physician or some other person facilitates a suicide by providing the means or the information to enable the person to commit suicide. In doctor-assisted suicide or physician-assisted suicide, the doctor prescribes a lethal drug for the patient to take. In the Hippocratic Oath, it says, "I will not give a lethal drug to anyone if I am asked, nor will I advise such a plan." Of course, it also has a wording that they won't cause an abortion. So they had to, of course, throw out the traditional Hippocratic Oath because now doctors are doing both of these things. In the United States, physician-assisted suicide has been decriminalized in 4 states: Oregon, Washington, Vermont, and California. Medical killing, that is, euthanasia and assisted suicide, is legal in a number of countries, including Canada, which it began to be practiced there this summer. So, people are confused about Montana, which is an unusual case. In Montana, the Supreme Court in 2009 created a defense for a physician charged with assisted suicide. But prosecutions are still possible. And in fact, the Montana legislature has never passed a law that would permit assisted suicide. They've had some bills before them, but they have refused to do it. And I think one reason is that they have some really good legislators in Montana who understand that this should not be done. For instance, Montana State Senator Jennifer Fielder, in 2013, when they were facing a bill to legalize assisted suicide, asked these questions. She said, "Why was more money spent on promoting assisted suicide than any other issue in Montana in 2013? Where did all this money come from?" Well, and then she says, "Could it be that convincing an ill person to end his or her life early will help health insurance companies save a bundle? How much would the government gain if it stopped paying Social Security, Medicare, or Medicaid on thousands of people?" The money, Compassion and Choices, that's the name of the group. It used to be Hemlock Society, but that's the name of the group that is promoting physician-assisted suicide legislation in all the states. Where do they get their money from? They're supposedly a nonprofit group. They get it from all of these groups that have vested interest in people dying sooner rather than later. They are relentlessly promoting assisted suicide across this country. Many states have rejected physician-assisted suicide over and over and over again. But as I said, they're relentless. Regardless of the person's health status, suicide is always a tragedy. And when a doctor prescribes an overdose of pills and it's paid for by insurance, that does not make it a medical treatment. It is still killing. Be aware that Compassion and Choices will be promoting assisted suicide in Texas soon. Their ultimate goal is to transform doctor-prescribed suicide into a legal, covered medical treatment in every single state. Be aware that they use the euphemism for assisted suicide. They call it aid in dying, or death with dignity, or some really nice-sounding name. Condition Orange. A specific threat is identified. Be on heightened alert and make sure that Texas's law that they have right now stays intact. Here's what Texas's law says. A person commits an offense if, with intent to promote or assist the commission of suicide by another, he aids or attempts to aid the other to commit or attempt to commit suicide. You can look that up in the Texas statutes. It's section 22.08. Compassion and Choice's name sounds very compassionate, doesn't it? It sounds wonderful. But compassion does not mean killing people. Hospitals were founded because of compassion. They were built, progress was made in pain control and the treatment and prevention and cure of diseases. Okay, that was compassion in action. Killing somebody is cheap. It doesn't take any compassion at all. It's, I just want you to be gone. Okay, what kind of choice? Compassion. compassionate choices. What kind of choice do they offer people with health problems or disabilities? We need to give better aid in living, not aid in dying. I want to talk to you about my brother Don. My brother Don was an athletic man. He dove into the lake one day and hit his head on a rock. Broke his neck. My cousin Bob fished him out of the water. Don had wished he'd left him in the bottom of the drink. For the first year or so after Don's accident, all he wanted to do was die. In fact, he was in Minnesota, and he wheeled himself out in his power chair, got himself outside in the middle of the winter and stayed there for a couple of hours until his head got cold. It's the only thing he could feel. So when his head got cold, he couldn't take it any longer, and he went inside. He nearly froze himself to death. That was how desperate he was to end his own life. But then, with proper care and encouragement and rehabilitation, Don got a new lease on life. For 11 years, he lived with his disability, and the last 8 or 9 years of his life were wonderful. He was living the life of Riley. I mean, he could go to ball games if he wanted to. He answered the phone for the police department for checking on the parolees and things. He loved to play Scrabble, and he lived in a home where they chose their own caregivers, and it was a duplex. It was a wonderful place. He had his own garden. He had his own dog. He was happy, and his children came to visit him. It was a wonderful life. It was a better life than he had before his accident, because he could no longer drink or gamble, and he had a lot of problems before his accident, and he became a decent human being after his accident. We just never know. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, in her 1969 book, Death and Dying, wrote, "Lots of my patients say they grow in bounds and leaps and finish all their unfinished business. But assisting a suicide is cheating them at these lessons, like taking a student out of school before final exams." Now we're going to talk about advance directives and what you're supposed to do in that department. Advance directives for healthcare are legal documents by which individuals make their wishes known regarding healthcare, just in case they ever become incapable of making their own decisions. Advance directives can be either life protective or they can be a license to kill you. So be very careful. The first advance directive was the living will. It was promulgated, it was given to us by the Euthanasia Educational Council, which was an arm of the Euthanasia Society of America, which later changed its name to the Society for the Right to Die. I found it very interesting when I was looking at one of the Euthanasia Society of America's early pamphlets from like 1939 or 1940, and they said, we're going to call it the right to die, because people are readier to accept the right to die than they are to accept the right to kill. Okay? Now they're at the right to kill stage. Without your permission. From the first step, it took a mere 23 years for the U.S. government to begin pushing the right to die. In 1990, they passed the Patient Self-Determination Act. Doesn't that sound like a nice bill? You get to determine your own fate. No, that's not what it means. Patient self-determination is all about getting you to refuse treatment ahead of time. It's a cost-saving device. In fact, it was part of the Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Bill. It was a little part of buried in the Budget Reconciliation Bill for that year. It's no coincidence that in 1987, Dr. Otis Bowen, then the Secretary of Health and Human Services, testified before the Senate Finance Committee that one way to attack the problem of healthcare expenditures was to encourage Americans to sign living wills. And we get the Patient Self-Determination Act. Don't be fooled. A living will does not ensure that your wishes will be followed. Only if you refuse treatment can you guarantee that your wishes will be followed. If you request treatment, Cassie and Elizabeth will be talking about that later, what's happening in Texas. The laws governing advance directives cover two kinds. One is the directive to physicians, at least that's what it's called here in Texas. It's a living will. It's a person's instruction to physicians telling them what treatments they want, don't want, etc., if they should ever be unable to make their own decisions, if they have a terminal condition or an irreversible condition. A medical power of attorney is better. It's a document in which you name an agent, someone you trust to make decisions for you in those circumstances. However, consider the terms that are used in this law that apply to both a directive to physicians and a medical power of attorney. Life-sustaining treatment. Life-sustaining treatment, this is what the law says. Treatment that sustains the life of a patient and without which the patient will die. The term includes artificially administered nutrition and hydration. That means feeding by tube or IV. Okay, and a life-sustaining treatment may be refused in an advance directive for two reasons. An irreversible condition. An irreversible condition is one that without life-sustaining treatment is fatal. So in other words, an irreversible condition is one in which if they take away your food and water, it's fatal. That's life. We all need food and water to live. And what about a terminal condition? Well, a terminal condition, according to the law, is an incurable condition caused by injury, disease, or illness that, according to reasonable medical judgment, will produce death within 6 months, even with available life-sustaining treatment provided. It doesn't mean they're going to provide it. That means even if it was provided, you'd only have 6 months according to the doctor's reasonable prediction. But all the studies I've read about predictions of life expectancy say that they're merely guesstimates and that they're wildly inaccurate. Predicting when someone's going to die is not an exact science. I know that, Ed, you can attest to that. You've had people live for a long time at your care home. I have a friend, my husband's friend Larry Larson, was told that he had pancreatic cancer. He had 1 month to live. With treatment, that man lived over 3 years. He had a good life for 3 years. And then I had a priest that I was his agent under his medical power of attorney, a Catholic priest named Father Dennis Warzala. And he decided one day that he didn't want dialysis anymore, and he was just going to stop dialysis and leave it up to God what happened. The doctor told him he'd be dead in a month. He lived for 6.5 more years. So you just don't know what's going to happen. It's not in our hands. It's in God's hands. So don't sign a living will or a directive to physicians because you can't foresee what the future holds. The easiest way to get people to refuse treatment is before they have a problem. That's when you throw out the propaganda and you say things like, well, aren't you afraid of suffering or becoming an economic or emotional burden on your families? Things like that. Or you bring out the position papers of groups like the American Geriatric Society or the Alzheimer's Association, and they paint a dark picture of the use of feeding tubes. Okay? They don't tell you the benefits. They tell you all bad things that can happen. Oh, you could get an infection. Well, an infection is better than starving to death, let me tell you. So, but they will tell you all the dark side of things, but not the helpful side. Okay, what are the benefits of being tube fed? Well, let's see. You live a little longer. You don't die of thirst and hunger. You might get to see your grandchildren a little bit more. There are all kinds of benefits, but they don't tell you about the benefits. They tell you about all of the complications that could happen. Research has repeatedly shown that healthy people say they would rather be dead than disabled. But when people get disabled, they say they'd rather live. So, it's not a good idea to make decisions ahead of time. In 2005, There was a case in Wisconsin in which I was involved. It was Staff Sergeant Chad Simons. And this is a case that just proves that anything you write or say can be used to kill you. Chad Simons suffered a severe brain injury in a roadside, he was attacked in Iraq, and it was a roadside bomb. And he had a living will that he had signed before he went to Iraq. And it said he didn't want any artificially administered nutrition and hydration in the event he became terminally ill or permanently unconscious. So Chad's wife insisted that he didn't want food and water, and found a doctor who said that he was irreversibly unconscious. He was admitted to a hospice in Madison, Wisconsin for comfort care while they starved and dehydrated him to death. A family member called me and she said, "What can we do to save his life?" She said when he was in rehab, he was squeezing a ball, and when he'd drop it, he'd bend over, he'd pick it up on his own and keep squeezing. He wanted to get better. How can we save his life? And then his best friend told the news reporter, "Chad's not unconscious. He's responding yes and no. And when I ask him if he wants to live, he says yes." But guess what? Because he had signed a living will saying no, he checked a box saying no artificially administered nutrition and hydration, his fate was sealed, and he starved and dehydrated to death in that hospice. No piece of paper can substitute for an advocate, someone who's committed to your good care, your welfare, someone who cares about you, and that might not be your next of kin. Be careful. Some people might want to inherit. If you haven't spoken to someone you trust about being there for you in the time of a medical crisis, I hope you have that conversation today. Choose a directive that's not a license to kill you. Okay? The one I recommend is called the Protective Medical Decisions Document. In the magazine that we have here, it's on page 3, all the information that you need to know about the Protective Medical Decisions Document. It's formulated by the Patients' Rights Council. Now, mind you, there are other documents that are good. I'm not going to say this is the only one out there, but I'm saying this is the one that I use, and this is the one that I think says what I want it to say. And be careful about those blank lines on some advanced directives. You fill in those blank lines and you use words that you think you understand, but they can have legal meanings that you don't know what they mean, and they can be interpreted by other people in ways that you did not intend. So be careful not to fill in blank lines. Okay? When you fill out a medical power of attorney, one thing you have to remember is the Protective Medical Decisions Document has a protection built in. It says that your agent may not make any decisions that would cause your death. And that's to protect you, but it's also to protect your agent from being pressured into allowing them to stop treatment that would cause your death. So, advanced directives, even a medical power of attorney, can be interpreted in ways that you did not intend it to be interpreted. So the Protective Medical Decisions Document says that the terms used in this document have the meaning that I have discussed with my agent, and my agent's interpretation of them is what is going to take precedence. So there's a couple of built-in protections. Does that mean you're going to be protected? No. It means that you have someone who's going to do their best to protect you. And that's the best we can ask for in this atmosphere, this medical atmosphere. Especially here in Texas, where we have a terrible law where doctors can override anything a patient wants. We're going to talk about some principles. In your bag, there's principles for medical decision making. It looks like this, only it doesn't have any yellow marks on it. Okay, it's called Principles for Medical Decision Making, Respecting the Value and Dignity of Human Life. much time do I have left? What time is it? I can't see my watch.
It's about 4.
Okay, we're going to go over this. I'm going to talk a little bit about POLST, and then I'll open it up for questions. The principles for making medical decisions, the most important one is whenever you're in doubt, err on the side of life. Okay? Any treatment that might be helpful can be tried and discontinued if it proves not to be. And it's the physician's obligation to tell whoever the decision maker is, whether it's the patient, the agent, the family, what they need to know in layman's terms in order to make good decisions, in order to give informed consent. But it's the patient or the agent who should be able to make the decision about whether they want a treatment or not, based on the best advice the doctor can give them. The problem is we can't always trust the doctors, and sometimes we have to do our own research. It's impossible to make morally sound, sensible, informed healthcare decisions based on guesswork about the future. So that's why you need an agent. They can have all the current information. And two extremes should be avoided. One is insistence on physiologically useless treatment that the patient can rightly forego. And the second one is withdrawal or withholding of treatment and nutrition and hydration in order to cause a person's death. And at the bottom of there's a little bit about nutrition and hydration that you might want to read. These principles are useful guidelines to discuss with your agent. As a former geriatric nurse and as a patient advocate for many years, I'm familiar with death. Multiple organ failure sometimes occurs with critical illness, and patients often gradually lose their appetites as they approach death. The common sense thing to do is to offer them, when they're approaching death, offer them whatever they need to be comfortable. Food and water, whatever comfort measures are necessary, and provide these until a natural death. But for people who are not near death, food and water are just simply basic care. No matter how they're provided, we provide them. Unless, of course, there's complications that it causes, then you try to find another way to provide it. You don't just stop providing it, you try to find alternatives. This is simply common sense, but common sense went out the door when the Right to Die movement moved in the door. Okay, in 1984 at a World Federation of Right to Die Societies meeting, an Australian bioethicist said this. She talked about the agenda of the World Right to Die movement. Helga Cuse explained the strategy. If we can get people to accept the removal of all treatment and care, especially the removal of food and fluids, they will see what a painful way this is to die. And then, in the patient's best interest, they will accept the lethal injection. That's been the plan all along, and that's what we're fighting. And Texas Right to Life and the Pro-Life Healthcare Alliance, Human Life Alliance, are striving to restore common sense to healthcare. You may have other questions. Our little magazine answers a lot of the questions that you might have. And I want to move on to a topic called POLST, Physician Orders for Life-Sustaining Treatment. In Texas, it's called MOST. And in every state, it has its own acronym or name. But MOST stands for Texas Medical Orders for Scope of Treatment. In some states, there's laws that regulate POLST, MOST, or whatever it's called in that state. But in Texas, it's a developing program. There's a coalition that's developing POLST in Texas, and they chose the name MOST. So what is it? Well, it's a two-sided sheet of paper on brightly colored paper, and it's got a checkbox where you just check the boxes, or the facilitator, the person asking you the question, checks the boxes according to how they interpret what you told them. MOST reduces complicated medical decisions to a check-the-box formula. I printed this one off. It's not in color, but I printed this one off of the Texas MOST website. And I want to go over it. The first thing that it says is follow this most and patient preferences first, then contact a physician. So in other words, once a person fills out a post, this may be their last chance to talk to a physician. Because after that, if an emergency happens, then the physician's not going to get called, the patient's not going to talk to a physician, the patient is going to have his most orders followed. Okay, any section not completed implies full treatment for that section and does not invalidate the form. What that means, if you don't check any of these boxes, you get full treatment. So what does that mean that this form is really for? This form is really to get you to refuse treatment. Because if you don't check any of these boxes, you're going to supposedly get treatment. But if you check the boxes, you won't. Another thing they don't tell you, that is even if some treatment could save your life, if the box is checked here, they won't give it to you, and it may cause your death. Be very, very careful. Some of the things that you can refuse on here or accept. Attempt resuscitation. Do not attempt resuscitation. It's like a DNR order. You don't need a most for a DNR order. They put DNR orders on people in the hospital all the time. In Texas, we have a law called the out-of-hospital DNR orders that you take home with you. A most is not necessary for a DNR order. All of these other things, there's time to talk to your agent or your doctor before they do these other things. For instance, comfort interventions only. What does that mean? How's a person going to interpret that? What if the person who is filling out this form, a facilitator, by the way, is somebody who's had 1 day of training in the Last Steps program here in Texas? It can be a member of the clergy, it can be a social worker, or it can be a medical professional. Okay, so it doesn't have to be somebody who has a lot of medical knowledge. It's a 1 day program. Comfort measures. What does that mean to people? Okay, say that the facilitator says to you, do you want us to keep you comfortable? And the person says yes. And they check the box. And the person does not realize, thank you, and the person does not realize that by checking that box, they have just sealed their fate because they will no longer provide them anything but comfort care. They didn't understand that as meaning that they would exclude all treatment. They understood that as meaning that they wanted to be kept comfortable. But they didn't refuse treatment. When you check that, you are refusing treatment. So be very, very, very careful. Another thing you have to be careful of with a most is no witnesses are required. So with no witnesses, you have some questions to ask. Every other advance directive, and this becomes medical orders, it's not a simple advance directive, it becomes medical orders. But any other advance directive that you sign requires witnesses. So if there are no witnesses, how do you know if the preferences checked reflect those of the facilitator or the patient? Was the patient steered towards a certain choice? Did the facilitator correctly interpret the patient's choices? Was the patient told that the most would go into effect immediately? And even if the patient could recover, treatments that were limited or refused by checkboxes would not be provided, and the patient could die as a result. Most is medical orders on steroids. It travels with you. If you become incompetent in the meantime, say you go home from hospital A with a most that says no food and fluids artificially provided, and you get home and you have a stroke and you end up in hospital B, the doctor there may want to start an IV on you, but you're incompetent now and you can't change your most and he can't do it because the most ties his hands. This is unique to most and post, that doctors' hands are tied by some other doctor's orders. That just isn't supposed to happen. No doctor should have to follow the orders of another doctor written, especially in another facility. Recognize that in January of 2016, this year, advanced care planning became a billable service under Medicare. And and other insurance companies are following suit. So you go to your doctor's office and they may ask you to fill out a most. Advice: I just want you to be extremely cautious and not to sign anything they give you or fill out anything they give you in a doctor's office, a hospital, or anywhere else. Just simply tell them, no thank you. I have an agent who will make decisions for me if I ever need it. And if I don't have an agent, just say, no thank you. When the time comes and a decision needs to be made, I want my family to make it with my doctor. You do not have to sign any advance directive, not even a post or most. It's always voluntary. In conclusion, I want to say that we don't want to defeat our foes who promote the right to die. What we want to do is convert them. Okay? We have to be witnesses that people are more important than money. Making life-affirming medical decisions is one way to do that. Caring for others, especially those closest to us, is another way. Supporting caregivers. You know, there are so many people out there who are struggling to give good care in their homes to loved ones, and they just need a little support and a little relief. Defending the conscience rights of healthcare providers. That is so important. And finally, we're here for you. When you need us, just call or email. And if there's a breath left in your body, it's not over yet. We treasure your life. So give us a call. Thank you. Okay, does anybody have any questions? Yes, sister.
Does it happen that the most or the pulse does become a requirement? Does any state does that happen? Because I know when we met in Minnesota a couple years ago, you said you're not required to sign it. And I wonder with the trend, has there been an unfortunate situation where it has become legal? Because I know there's a lot of pressure.
It's not legal in any state to force. Even if you go on the National Pulse website, it says it's always voluntary. But there are nursing homes that make everybody fill out a most. Tell them it's a requirement, but it's not the law. And but there are nursing homes and there are hospitals that try to get everybody as they leave to fill out a most or a pulse. And there are doctor's offices. Jo Tolk had a friend who told her that she went to her doctor's office to get her prescription refilled. And they tried to convince her to fill out a pulse. And they were very insistent that she do this. And when she refused, they sent it home with her to think about. So be really, really careful of what's being pushed on you. Don't sign anything. If you have any doubts at all, give us a call. That's what we're here for. Yes?
I wanted to say, too, be very careful because I've had more than one case where people have refused to sign and later found that there was one in the play anyway. So I advise people to not only to tell them that you want to see the physical chart, but also that you want to see your electronic chart and make sure that nothing has been put in there.
Any other questions? One thing I want to say about most or pulsed or whatever is that it is definitely a cost containment measure. And I have here in my notes somewhere some proof. Susan Toll, MD, who is the director of the Center for Ethics in Healthcare at the Oregon Health Sciences University, which is the medical school in Oregon, developed the pulse paradigm, the national pulse paradigm. And she reported that she gets a lot of phone calls from Washington, D.C. saying, exactly how much does this program save? Can you tell us about the cost savings and pulse? And one of pulse, or most promoters here in Texas, Dr. Robert L. Fine, he's the director of the Office of Clinical Ethics and Palliative Care at Baylor Healthcare System, addressed the reasons to support this program. Two of his reasons struck me as very troubling. High costs, the first one, high costs in the last year of life. with 28% of Medicare dollars spent in the last year. When do you think we're going to spend most of our health care dollars? When we're healthy? Okay, so that just didn't compute with me. And then he said the second reason, high amounts of unacceptable suffering, with 50% of patients having severe pain at the end of life. That is an outright lie. He is a palliative care specialist. Palliative care is supposed to take care of pain. And he's telling us that they can't control 50% of people who have pain. They can't control it. He's lying. If true, this statement simply indicates a need for better education for our doctors in pain control. It means that we need to have better access to pain control for our patients. It does not mean that we need a most. It means we need to improve the care that we're providing. And then another fact that he does not mention, because they never mention the uncomfortable facts that don't fit their purpose, having a disease associated with pain doesn't mean you have to endure unbearable pain. I looked this up. The World Health Organization, every palliative care doctor who's written an article, I've read hundreds of them, says this. And believe me, palliative care is a big problem. I'm not saying it isn't. I am saying there are some good palliative care doctors, but palliative care overall is a disaster. Here's what they say, though. The vast majority of patients who get on an appropriate, comprehensive pain regimen live comfortably and die peacefully. And that's the palliative care specialist. So what kind of palliative care specialist is Dr. Fine? One more question? Yes?
How often is morphine overdose or other overdose of pain medications used?
Ron is probably much more able to answer that question than I am. I don't deal much with hospice. I mostly deal with patients who are being denied treatment in hospital situations or nursing home patients. Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Julie. And now you'll have an opportunity for a short break, and then at 10:30 we'll resume with Elizabeth Graham from Texas Right to Life.